I think I'm live. Hello, friends. Hello, and welcome to another book review for the Annotation Station Book Club. Yeah. This one is a little bit later than usual because it took me a while to get my thoughts together. But this is the nonfiction book that we read in July. Disfigured on Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space by Amanda Deluc. And that sound is my cat using a scratching post. I'm going to give it a second for a couple friends to join in the chat before I start deep diving. But if you're new here and you're rewatching this and you're interested in joining the book club to get access to the Discord to talk about the books while we're reading them, you can join by becoming a channel member at any level here on YouTube to get the link to my book club. Otherwise, the live show reviews are free and posted online every month. So that's exciting. The point of the Annotation Station Book Club is to read diversely and stay informed. So every month we read one fiction and one nonfiction. So the pick for July was Disfigured. If you want to join us for the next review, which is the nonfiction book for August, we read Black AF History, an unwhitewashed story of America, which I finished and rated 5 stars, by the way. So you're probably going to want to tune in for that because I'm going to have a lot to say. So yeah. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and slowly get started. I guess I'll start with like a overall description of what the book is about, right? So Disfigured is written by Amanda Deluc, who is an author who has cerebral palsy. And this is a reflection and meditation on the author's experience with cerebral palsy and growing up as a disabled white woman in America who is thinking about how fairy tales and the stories that we are told as children have an impact on the way that we understand disability, how disability is represented, and like how children kind of internalize that and then reflects how adults interact with children, or the spaces that we create in stories for children to see themselves with disabilities. So, yeah. Damien, yay! How dare YouTube hide this from me for 2 minutes? I know YouTube's been like a little bit crazy with the commercials lately. Like I know that there's a little commercial break before the video actually starts, but then they've also been inserting commercials throughout live streams. I'm like, dude, wait till the live stream's over. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. Thank you for supporting. Damien, I think me and you might have rated this very similarly. I ultimately ended up giving this 3 stars for a couple reasons. So this video is going to be full of spoilers, by the way. I'm personally of the belief that when it comes to nonfiction, there's no such thing as spoilers. Because it's about getting an education. And a lot of the time, the way that the story is structured is important to understanding the material. So I would say, even if you know the facts, still go read any nonfiction anyway, right? Like when it comes to nonfiction, I'm a person who thinks like I need to read it with my own eyeballs to get an understanding of what the author was trying to say and how they said it, because this information is going to read differently for different people. But personally, I give it 3 stars. So, you know. Natalie! I'm here to lurk while my hair dye is working its magic. Yay, lurk with me. I'm actually glad that you're here because I have some teacher thoughts that I want to get to eventually, and I know you're going to have some things to say about it. Okay, so where do I want to start? I took notes, by the way. I have so many notes on my thoughts. Good thing I went back. This is, okay, hear me out. Oh, Damien says, I rated it 2.5 stars. This simply should have been, okay, yes, I'm going to agree with you. I'm of the 2 minds with this, okay? First off is that in doing a little bit of research, as I do before these live streams, there's not a lot of books on this topic. So I will say that like this is needed because we don't have enough stories reflecting on the disability community and the way that fairy tales impact childhood perceptions of disability. Point blank, period. Steph, I took notes. Me, I ran to Discord, same but different. Listen, in the Discord, you know how I do that thing where I'm like, note to self, look this up? That's me taking notes, okay? And then I go back and I write it all down. So not that different. Okay. So, but like Damien said, I actually agree that this either could have been an essay where it was significantly shorter. And part of the reason for that is that the author spends a lot of time reiterating the same thoughts over and over again, and very much gets on, like, I'm going to say a soapbox in a positive way, because I feel like sometimes soapbox has like a negative connotation. They get on a soapbox about misogyny in fairy tales, and it's like, yeah, that's true. There's also a very specific intersectional point that we can discuss about misogyny and people who experience both misogyny and discrimination against disabilities in fairy tales, period. But they keep going back to that same point, and I'm like, that could have been its own essay or its own book, right? What I personally wanted more from this, and the reason that I gave it 3 stars, is I wanted more of a worldview. I feel like there could have been, like, if the book was going to be this long, which, I mean, it's not even that crazy long, but for what's in here, I feel like it's too long. It is 235 pages. I wanted more, either like collab with another author who has a different disability or is of a different demographic or culture that can give us a different POV and add to the story. Like, but previously the book club read Rehearsals for a Living by Robin Maynard and Leanne Bedosamosok Simpson. And I feel like having 2 authors, not saying that like comparing this to that book particularly, but having 2 authors gives us a wider view and more of like a opportunity for critical discussion. And because this is very much just Amanda Deluc's observations and thoughts, and she also admits in the very beginning, she's like, I'm not a professional, this is just from my experience. I feel like there could have been more research into this that would have made this more impactful, in my opinion. I hope that makes sense. I also feel like the author didn't really have to say much about the topic of their books. Yeah, as they ranted about lots of other things as well, maybe it could have worked better as an essay collection. Yeah, I agree with that. Or they could have collabed with someone who knows more about fairy tales, right, from all over the world, because they actually did research. Like, she did do research, because there is, listen, I running a nonfiction book club has taught me not all nonfictions are the same. Not that I ever thought they were, but like when it comes to your sources, if it doesn't have sources, you're already losing a star from me. If the nonfiction book does not come with a list of sources in the back, you've already lost credibility for me. So she does do some research, and we do get some of her sources, but it could have been better, So I agree with Damien. Like, I wanted more, someone who is specialized on this, or to have her interviewing people who are specialists on this subject. But really, it's just her research. So I don't know. I feel like it could have been better. Yeah, at this point, yes. If it doesn't have sources, I'm not picking it up. Yes. So yeah, I agree. So I'm going to talk about positives first, and then I'll jump into the negatives. That's how I think I'm going to do this, because that's kind of how I did my notes. So the author has cerebral palsy. And what they talk about a lot is like the Disneyfication of stories. And so because of that, I feel like this is very much a Western view of fairy tales. So the Disneyfication of stories, for anyone who doesn't really know, is like this in more recent history, the adaptations of Disney stories having these happy endings, and we have a lot of characters actually that are representative of various disabilities being used in these stories in ways that are either villainizing the disabled body or make for comedic relief and effect, making them sidekicks. Examples that were given here a lot are The Little Mermaid, is talked about a lot. Sleeping Beauty, Snow White, and I feel like there's another one, but I might be forgetting. But I feel like those three are talked about a lot. And what Disney did was they took these stories specifically straight from Grimm's fairy tales and kind of altered them, where in Grimm's fairy tales, it was like a little bit more straightforward, the villainization of a disabled body. And in Disney, it's a little bit more subtle, because even the heroes of the stories have these disabilities, but they're not treated as equal or as people for having those disabilities. Yeah, they brought up the Beast a lot. Yes, I totally agree. So like an example of, I'm checking off my notes as I like talk about this. So an example of what was brought up with The Little Mermaid, because it's not being conventionally attractive. Yeah. I mean, they bring that up. And I feel like I'm more annoyed with like Disney for that. So I feel like they had a point in a way, because they talk about how the Beast he stops being the Beast when he becomes a prince because he's loved. But being unattractive is not a disability. It's not. But I think what what they're trying to get at is like this idea of someone who is disabled is not acceptable as being seen in society, and so they're kind of like hidden from public view kind of thing. But they brought him up a lot. They also brought up Quasimodo. I think Quasimodo is the one that really hit for me and makes me very viscerally mad, because I already have these thoughts about Quasimodo. What is happening? Kitties. Someone got mad. Someone stole someone's toy. Don't listen to them. My cats are arguing over toy. Quasimodo is the Hunchback of Notre Dame. And that story in and of itself, even as a kid, really made me upset, because Quasimodo is physically disabled, and they, in their ending, they do not get the person that they fall in love with. They do not have a romantic happy ending. Kitties. Oh my goodness, there's so much drama in my house right now. I'm saying hi to babies. And so he is seen as this like person who is only validated and valued because of what they do for society. Society is never made to accept him for his disabilities. They accept him as a hero once they've done something for him. So it's all of these stories always go back to the disabled body conforming to society, not society conforming to the body. And so that's not surprising in and of itself. That to me is like a very obvious point that they talk about. But going back to The Little Mermaid, they talk about how in The Little Mermaid is ableist because it's not that her having, her being a mermaid means that she is disabled, because when she's under the ocean, she's very much like, this is her, everything is accessible to her, but she has to change her body in order to conform to being on land, to be with the prince. And so that point of comparison makes it so that we can see what she gives up as her changing her disability to function in society. It's like a metaphor. And that only by changing one's body and becoming able-bodied in this sense is the disabled body able to find peace and happiness and deserving of love. And so that's kind of like a reoccurring theme throughout these Disney movies, that while not said out loud, is implied, and that these things are internalized in children, especially disabled children, and how they see themselves. So that is I feel like that's like the main point of this whole thing, of this whole book. Where am I at? Of this book. So So like that, if I had to give this book a thesis, I feel like that would be it. Oh, and on the topic of society conforming to the body, I had so many issues with the author's hate for the medical theory of disability. Can you remind me of what you mean? Which part was that? I don't remember exactly which. If you can remind me, I'll probably have something to say about it. Remind me what you mean by the medical theory of disability. But yeah, so that was like the main point of it. Okay. Something I really want to, I guess I'm going to flip flop because listen, my brain wants to do what it's going to do, and I'm going to follow my brain and where it feels like going with this. I'm going to get to a teacher point, actually, of a point of criticism, since we're talking about childhood. So the author is not a teacher. I'm a teacher. And something that they criticize in here, I feel like, is a lack of understanding about how education works. And now, if anyone is watching this later and has a different thought after reading it, please feel free to let me know in the comments, like if you disagree or if you see something differently. But they had criticisms about the education system that I disagreed with. So they talk about the education system and facilities which are meant to nurture the growth of children and are supposed to be accommodating to disabled bodies, as lowering the bar and standard for education for children. And so kind of making it seem like children who have disabilities are not being given a proper education. And I have a couple things to say about this. I will add a caveat in saying that disability rights within education have come a long way in the past 40 to 50 years. There are still places, and there was a time when rights around the quality of education that a disabled child should get was not a thing, that they were mistreated, that they in some places still are mistreated, and that disabled education still needs to be advocated for. Okay, actually, let me check these comments real quick. Let's see. They were complaining for pages on end about how we're not financing accommodations, but instead giving money towards treating disabled bodies, and that was the word. Okay, I think we're getting to the similar thing, like between the medical theory and the education. I think we're talking about the same area in the book. Porque no los dos? Yeah. And also, as a disabled person myself, I kind of felt shame for choosing to get certain treatments to improve my own quality of life. I totally understand where you're coming from with that. I totally understand why you feel that way after reading this. I've elaborated on it more in Discord, so feel free to revisit my rant if you need more context. Thanks. Yes, you know what? I will agree with that. And I will say that, while the author was advocating for saying, that disabled bodies don't need to change for society, that they are fine the way they are, if someone wants to get any kind of treatment or, medical procedure or anything to change their body, that is also a valid thing. And that is not really something that was, I think, pointed out in the book in a way that was meaningful. So I agree with you, Damien, on that. Because they spent so much time going on about how disabled bodies don't need to change, which again is true. They don't have to change. But if they want to do things for their own reasoning, that is also valid. So it's not about shaming the disabled body at all, or disabled person, for the choices that they make. So yeah, I agree. So going back to that education thing, which I think was still in that same chapter, yeah, they talk very much about how they're saying that education period is not conducive to disabled cognitive or cognitive learning. And I say I disagree, because they did not acknowledge that accommodations and modifications are now a federal regulation in education. And that's a whole thing in of itself, is that our government is attempting to, a United States government, again, because this is a Western central book, is attempting to defund the Department of Education and saying give it back to the states. But what they don't understand is that curriculum isn't run by the federal Department of Education. Curriculum is run by the states, and federal protections is actually like protecting people with disabilities. So it is very much relevant to what is happening in the current political climate at the time that I'm reviewing this book. But those federal regulations require teachers and educators to apply modifications and accommodations for disabled and various learning styles in our classrooms. So what that is so the difference between a modification and an accommodation is that a modification is a change to the actual material, while an accommodation is the change to how the child learns the material. And the reason for this differentiation is because you have people who are on different spectrums, right? Disability is not a one size fits all. There are different kinds of disabilities. There's cognitive disabilities. There's physical disabilities. Child may have an IEP, which is an individualized education plan for a cognitive disability, or they may have a 504, which is a usually towards like some kind of physical disability. And so it's not about saying that that child cannot learn. It's that they are being given various learning material and ways of learning that are ensuring that they are going to have the most success with the material. So for example, if a student has like severe processing delay, it could either be that instead of giving them a lot of material, condensing the material down to what are the essential points that we want them to focus on so that they go deeper into the meat or like the main meal of the material, rather than being distracted by all of the extended information that, while good to have, is not essential to what we want them to take away from this lesson, right? Or an accommodation would be like, instead of writing, maybe it's oral, right? Or again, going back to a processing delay, like they have extended time to read the resources and then write their answer or give their answer or whatever the case is. Like accommodations and modifications are not a bad thing. So that was something that kind of irked me a little bit about this. Again, they didn't talk specifically about modifications and accommodations, but they did talk about how they were just very adamant about education systems not doing enough, but they didn't talk about what education systems are doing. So I'm like, you can't critique it and not talk about it. So yeah, they were right in some ways, and in my opinion, not thorough enough. Again, going back to the fact that this person I feel like needed to do a little bit, we needed more research, but that's just my opinion. Okay, so I'm going to get off my teacher soapbox about that. Yeah, so what else? I'm going to check that off because I talked about that. Talked about the disabled body changing. Someone will succeed. Something that I found really interesting, I will say, is when they talked about fairy tales in the traditional sense. So a child who has a cognitive disability, whether it be autism, or, hold on. I mean, in my school, uni accommodations and modifications have been a thing line before they were even legally condensed. I had so many of them. Yeah. Mostly because of my then undiagnosed social anxiety and several physical disabilities. I feel like education, it's hard to make blanket statements about what students are experiencing disabled or not without diving deep into research, about what has been found. Exactly. That's what I wanted. But I feel like most of this was anecdotal, and that's my problem with it. Because I'm like, that topic could be an entire chapter or two. But the author, in my reading and memory of reading this, I don't think went deep enough in that subject. It was just very much like blanket statement. So yeah. And I never perceived it as a sign of weakness and was never treated like I couldn't learn. The teacher just wanted to make sure I would. Exactly. Because the best learning happens in a safe space. Correct. I mean, I will say that the author did talk about one statistic, I think, where they said from their research that children are more likely to bully students who are less, what's the word? Who are less like visibly impaired. So like they're more likely to bully a student who seems as able-bodied as them, but might have like some kind of cognitive function that is showing itself in some ways versus someone who's like in a wheelchair or in crutches or something like that. Not that they don't get bullied, but it's this like that children have this kind of point of comparison to punch down. And I can understand that from the statistic, but I feel like they didn't go deep enough still, which is another thing that I wanted. This is not to say that some disabled students do not receive a subpar education. Exactly. But we can't say most or all do. Moves are being made to shift into better educational experiences for these students. Thank you. Exactly. I mean, my social anxiety was caused by bullying. Right. And those things still happen. Like Natalie saying, like Damien saying, these things still happen. Right. But just writing from someone's anecdotal experience from when they were in school, again, the author was 36 or 37 when she wrote this. So she's reflecting on time from like 25 to 30 years ago in her life is a totally different experience from writing this 30 years later because education is vastly different now. So we needed more research. Yeah, it does. It definitely does. It depends on the class and the teachers as well. Yeah. So that's just my hot take is like, I don't think that the author did enough research to really go in deep on this book as I would have liked it to. But also they do acknowledge, I will say, I will give them credit that they do acknowledge, she's like, I am a white woman. I am talking from my experience. I am not speaking for Black and brown bodies in any way. But that to me is like a gaping hole in this where I'm like, okay, so you can't speak for those experiences. Hello, do an interview. Hello, interviews exist. Like talk to people, that's just, I just wanted more of that. So, again, not saying that this book is bad. I don't think it's a bad book. I still think people can learn from this. And I did learn some things from this. So I am going to talk about some more positive things in a second, but I just feel like it could have done more. So that's my critique. I used it as a walking aid and were pretty glasses when I was in high school. I didn't have a single negative experience. Interesting. Yeah. So everyone's experience with this is different. So I'm glad you didn't have I'm glad you didn't have a negative experience. I'm glad you had a good experience, and someone else might have a different experience with that. All are valid, right? So yeah. So going back to fairy tales for a sec. So with the actual invention of fairy tales, something that I learned was that, and unfortunately, it's not surprising to me once I learned it. I'm like, oh, that sucks. But it's, yeah. So when a child has a cognitive disability, it tends to manifest somewhere between the ages of 2 to like 6, depending on the disability. Some could be later, earlier, it depends. It could be in the form of them speaking at a later age. It could be in the form of, them not processing information or not like mimicking their parents and surroundings at an age that is most typical for a child. And that stage of cognitive development. It could be a later reading comprehension. It could be nonverbal. It could be verbal. Like there's so many things it could be, right? And what was happening, what the author talked about was that stories of fairies and changelings was created in the Middle Ages, I think, as a way for people to, I guess, recuse themselves. I don't know if that's the right word. To like, for parents to create an excuse to distance themselves from the cognitive disability of their child by saying that their child was swapped. Because if your child is not at an age where they are expected to show any kind of specific cognitive growth, right? Like, you don't expect a 1 to 2-year-old to be reading fluently. But if by the time they're 4 and 5 and they're just not talking, what would happen is that parents would say, oh, my child must have been swapped, a fairy swapped my child with a changeling because my child was fine, and all of a sudden they're not doing things that they're supposed to be doing, so that's not my child. That's a doppelganger. And I was like, that is fucked up. That is so fucked up. This, but like, not surprising, that, you know, a lot of these things, these mental disabilities, or even cerebral palsy happens, is caused by things that happen pre-birth. A lot of times happens in the womb, or a lot of these can be hereditary. And so it's this disconnect of not wanting to acknowledge that it is something that it could be hereditary or something that was caused by, you know, not saying that the parents intentionally caused this. No one intentionally causes that, but like that these are things that have external factors that are related to the parent or genetics, or like other predispositions, but instead saying, oh, it's something else, right? Or even in modern times, as what we're seeing now, very unfortunately, and very as an extreme form of propaganda and misinformation, that vaccines cause disability and cognitive decline, and that is not true. Vaccines do not cause autism. Vaccines do not cause disability. Yes, there is a very small percentage of side effects, and there are people who have unfortunately dealt with side effects to vaccines. Like, I do know someone personally who, very unfortunately, I think they said it was like a 1 in something like I don't know if it was like 500,000 chance or 1 million chance or whatever. I don't remember what the statistic was when I first met this person, that they actually got diabetes from, I forgot what vaccine it was. I don't know if it was the chickenpox vaccine. It was something that you get as a child. But like, yes, it's very unfortunate and it changed their life, but it's such a small percentage compared to the amount of people that would be affected and or unalived by these diseases should we not have vaccines. And also, those side effects, diabetes is not the same as autism, or not the same as a cognitive disability or these other disabilities that we're talking about. So, I mean, that's also something that I think that like the author touched on, but didn't go deep enough, in my opinion. And that could have been a whole thing. But anyway, so yeah. And also, for anyone who doesn't know, cerebral palsy is specifically a disability of, it affects body movement. I think, like, is it muscle coordination? Yeah. So just so everyone's aware what the author has. So yeah, but that like disconnect on the parents' part of not acknowledging or finding these external excuses in society to not take responsibility for the care of their child pisses me off. Hard-getting vaccines. Funny story. My mom doesn't trust docs, and she was scared to vaccinate because if it causes my grand had to remind her it's better than literally that last part. Like, it's first of all, it's not true, right? It's not true that these things cause disability, but even so, you'd rather them be gone? Like, come on. Like, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Good job, Gran. Crazy. I know. So yeah. What else? What other notes do I have? Oh, they talked about, okay, let's talk about like villains in Disney movies and then like sidekicks. They talked about Hansel and Gretel and the witch. They talked about witches a lot. So Hansel and Gretel's witch, and what's it in Snow White? Is it the evil stepmom? I think it's the Snow White's evil stepmom who becomes a witch. And so both of them, in both cases, have crutches and or like a cane that they walk with, and so they're physically disabled, but that the disability is used as a means of justifying the ruse. I think it's not only about the parents rejecting responsibility, and many of them just knew they didn't have resources to care for the disabled because it was easier. Yeah, 100%. I think you're right. It's easy. It's an excuse for them to distance themselves from having to care for their kids, which to me is also a form of not taking responsibility, of rejecting responsibility. So I think those things are like tied together. Yeah, I think you're totally right. So yeah, the witches are they're physically disabled, and it kind of feeds into something that is seen in a lot of fairy tales, or this mistrust of disabled people, of seeing them, physically disabled people, as like, or even cognitively disabled people, as seeing them as like pretending to be what they are, or at actually not being as bad as it is, or as debilitating as it can be, you know? So that was something that they talked about. They also mentioned, like, I think the 7 dwarves as well. The 7 dwarves from Snow White, because they're small people. And their happy ending is seeing their able-bodied friend get married and like go live in a castle and all these things. I guess it could also be argued that they have like, they each represent different like emotional quandaries. And that some of them can be tied to cognitive disability, but just like them being a sidekick, they talked about in Beauty and the Beast, who is Gaston's buddy, I think is also a disabled representation, and I can't remember exactly what that representation was, but it's the disabled person is always the sidekick, never the main character in these fairy tales. And that if they are the main character, their body has to change in order to find love and happiness. Or if their body doesn't change, like in the case of Quasimodo, then they have proved their worth to society for society to accept them because of what they've done for society, not what society has done for them. So I feel like the author did have some really good points in those areas in regards to like how disability representation is in fairy tales. So for those reasons, I would say read it, because it is interesting in that way. What else? I feel like I'm getting to the end of my points. I might have just a few more things to say. I'm making good time. This is great. Okay. Sure. Yeah, I just feel like overall this book could have been shorter. I just wanted more. So like I could see space for, if Amanda Deluc decided to write a part 2 to the story and expand on the story, or this research that she's done in more of a world view, I think it could be really good. Also, if they collaborate with other authors who are of other disabilities, other representation of other cultures, there's a lot of material here, and I would like to see that. So I would read more from this author if that was to happen, but I think that just reading this book by itself is not enough to get a full view of. I think this is a good like entry point into this discussion, but I would like to see more. So yeah, I feel pretty comfortable. Giving it a solid 3 for a nonfiction. This book could have been shorter, but I wanted more of the duality of stuff. Yeah. Listen, I have my reasoning, okay? Like, again, this physically easily could have cut 75 pages, okay? But on this topic, I want more, and I want it framed better. Listen, maybe I need to be an editor or something. I'm like, listen, I want to be a nonfiction editor, actually. I mean, I have. Tangent for a second. I've actually done editing for grad school papers before. Not for spelling, because my dyslexia and my own disabilities are there, but for content. So I'm just saying, if anybody's watching this and they need a nonfiction fact checker editor, hit me up. It's neither here nor there. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, I think those are all the points that I have to say about Disfigured. on fairy tales, a disability, and naked. Oh, you know what? Wait, I have one more thought actually before I go, because I do have reading sprints in like 20 minutes. Part of the title is on making space. I don't think we talked about that enough. I really don't. I think this book, it talked about the fairy tales and it talked about the disability. That's the main thesis. But it didn't talk about the making space. It didn't. Personally, much or at all. And I feel like that is a fault in it as well. I mean, it touches on those things, but in order to make space, we need to have room for deeper discussion, alternate voices, views, and experiences to chime together, to talk about how to be progressive in making space. And I don't think that this author necessarily does that. So that is another thing that I think this book is lacking and I would like to see more of. But yeah, those are my thoughts. Okay, cool. So if there's any last comments that anyone in the chat would like to drop, Damien, thank you so much for being here. Natalie, thank you for chiming in as well. And again, if you'd like to join us, if you're watching this back later and you'd like to join us for the August book review, Black AF History, look at my tabs. I got so many things to say, y'all. I'm so excited. So to go from a 3-star to a 4 to a 5-star, very exciting. Okay, I'm gonna go get ready for my reading sprints. Thank y'all for being here. And if you're going to the sprints, I'll see you in like 18 minutes. If not, thanks for watching and bye everybody. See ya.